You will find it just about everywhere. 172 bulldozers built the Pennsylvania Turnpike, America's first superhighway. It is a clean, memorable number. It shows up in articles, in books, in video after video. So we went looking for where that number actually comes from. And what we found says a lot about how this road gets remembered. Because the real story of the machines that crossed that mountain range in 20 months is far bigger than one number. Most of it has been quietly forgotten, including 13 miles of the highway itself, 2 long tunnels, and a full 4-lane road that have been sitting abandoned in the trees since 1968. Start with the bulldozers, because that is the figure everyone repeats. We traced it back, and it leads to one place: Caterpillar's own company history. Their records list 172 Caterpillar dozers, 17 motor graders, 2 elevating graders, and 23 generator sets out on the job. So the number is real. But look closely at what it counts. One brand, Caterpillar's own machines, in Caterpillar's own telling. It leaves out the shovels, the drag lines, the dump trucks, and every other maker working that road. The honest count is harder to pin down. What the contractors actually reported was something close to $30 million worth of equipment and around 50 paving plants, fed by roughly 15,000 men working around the clock in shifts. That is the real machine story. And it gets stranger, because most of those machines were not breaking new ground at all. They were finishing a job a railroad had started and abandoned more than 50 years before. This story does not really start with a highway. It starts with a railroad war. In the early 1880s, 2 of the richest men in America went after each other. William Vanderbilt wanted a rail line straight across southern Pennsylvania to break the grip the Pennsylvania Railroad held on the whole state. Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick backed him because they were tired of paying that railroad's freight rates to move their steel. So crews began carving a line called the South Penn, blasting 7 tunnels straight through the Allegheny ridges. Thousands of men worked it for $1.25 a day, and the work was brutal. At the Sidling Hill Tunnel, on the 6th of July, 1885, a single dynamite blast killed 3 men, including the engineer running that bore John O'Brien. 16 days later, a second blast killed 6 more. The accounts from the time describe the bodies as so torn by rock they could barely be identified. Then that same summer, it all stopped. John Pierpont Morgan brought Vanderbilt and the Pennsylvania Railroad to the table and brokered a truce. The South Penn was finished. The men set down their tools and walked off the ridges, and the half-dug tunnels were left to the dark. People started calling it Vanderbilt's Folly. And here is the detail almost everyone misses. Those tunnels never had a single train run through them. Not one. They had been dug from both ends, but the crews quit before the 2 bores ever met in the middle. If you want to see how those abandoned tunnels came back to life 50 years later, and the fleet of machines that finally pushed a road through them, stay with us. Like and subscribe. It genuinely helps these forgotten stories survive. By the 1930s, Pennsylvania had a depression to fight, and a mountain range nobody could cross by car. So the state went back to those dead railroad tunnels. On the 27th of October, 1938, the work began. A fleet of brand new Caterpillar dozers, the same machines behind that famous number, lined up against the Alleghenies and started shoving the mountains out of the way. At a place called Clear Ridge, they hit solid rock and cut straight through it, carving a notch 153 feet deep and half a mile long. By the time they finished that single cut, they had moved more than 1 million cubic yards of stone. The men started calling it Little Panama after the canal. And that was one ridge. Inside the tunnels, the work was worse. Many of the diggers were coal miners, thrown out of work by a strike and glad for the wages. The cycle never changed. Drill around 100 holes into the rock face, pack them with 800 to 1,100 pounds of explosives, fire the round, and send the next shift in to haul out what was left. 6 of the 7 tunnels were the old South Penn bores, and reusing them was supposed to be the easy part. It was not. Because the railroad had cut its plans down to a single track halfway through the 1880s, the crews found wide mouths that pinched to a narrow gap in the middle, right where the bores had never met. At the Kittatinny Tunnel, they cut into a seam of wet sand that poured hundreds of cubic yards of red and black grit into the bore and forced them to rebuild the wall. But finishing those old tunnels instead of drilling new ones still saved the project around $2 million. And none of this would have moved without New Deal money. The country was deep in the Depression, and the federal government bankrolled the road, buying roughly $40 million in turnpike bonds and adding a public works grant of nearly $30 million more, all of it meant to be paid back later through tolls. 155 contractors from 18 states took on the work, under a chief engineer named Samuel Marshall. The raw materials alone are hard to picture. More than 700,000 tons of sand, over 1 million tons of stone, 50,000 tons of steel, and more than 300,000 tons of cement, much of it poured straight onto graded earth with no gravel roadbed under it. One small thing shows how carefully the engineers thought about those tunnels. Every portal got a fan house to push out the carbon monoxide. Everyone except the eastern mouth of Rays Hill, the only opening short enough that they left with no ventilation fan at all. Above ground, the pace was relentless. At full tilt, 50 paving plants were laying as much as 3.5 miles of concrete in a single day. And the crews had about 20 months to drive 4 lanes of highway across 160 miles of country that most people swore no car would ever cross. This next part is the reason the road landed on front pages across the country. Like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. By the fall of 1940, it was done. On the 1st of October, 1 minute after midnight, the Pennsylvania Turnpike opened to traffic. There were no traffic lights, no cross streets, and no railroad crossings anywhere along it. And here is the part that sounds invented. It opened with no speed limit at all. Drivers pushed their cars to 80 and 90 miles an hour across the mountains. And a magazine of the day wrote that it was the first American highway that was better than the American car. That was not just talk. A federal study in 1939 had predicted the road might draw 715 vehicles a day. On the first Sunday it was open, about 27,000 cars came, led through the gates that first night by 2 ordinary drivers named Homer Romberger and Carl Bow, names almost nobody remembers now. By the end of its first year, more than 2.4 million vehicles had driven it, roughly double what anyone had planned for. Now, it was not the first piece of limited access road in America. Shorter parkways had opened before it, but nothing this long, this fast, and on this scale had ever been tried, and the country had never seen anything like it. Within a single generation, it became the model for the entire interstate system. But the road that opened with no speed limit had a flaw built right into it. Those 7 tunnels were each only 2 lanes wide. 4 lanes of traffic had to squeeze down to 2 to pass through the mountain, and by the 1960s the backups ran for miles, sometimes for hours, on a summer weekend. So the Turnpike Commission made a decision. It would drill new tunnels beside some of the old ones and simply abandon the rest. It had already done this once, 4 years earlier, when it bypassed the Laurel Hill Tunnel and left a 2-mile piece of road behind. This time it drilled new bores alongside 4 of the tunnels and cut 2 more loose. On the 26th of November, 1968, a 13-mile stretch of the original highway went quiet for good. 2 tunnels went silent with it, the Sidling Hill bore more than a mile long, and the Rays Hill bore. Traffic was routed around them, and the road that had cost so much to build was left exactly where it sat. If you want more stories like this one, the kind where we pull the records and check what really happened, like and subscribe. Because that stretch is still out there. In 2001, the Commission sold the whole thing, 13 miles of 4-lane highway and both tunnels, to a conservancy for a single dollar. It is a bike trail now, at least on paper, though most of it just sits cracking apart in the trees. Every original sign was stripped off and stolen years ago. The tunnels run pitch black in the middle and hold a chill about 20 degrees colder than the air outside, like concrete refrigerators built into the mountain. At each end, small control rooms still sit sealed behind heavy steel doors, the last working parts of a highway that has not carried a car in more than half a century. Most people on the new turnpike a few miles away have no idea it is even there. In 2009, a film crew shot scenes for the movie The Road inside the Rays Hill Tunnel because it already looked like the end of the world. And yes, there are ghost stories about this place. We checked those too, and there is nothing underneath them. The real story is stranger than any of it. So go back to that number we started with, 172 bulldozers. It is true, as far as it goes. But it was never the whole story. The machines that built America's first superhighway are not parked in a museum. The road they laid across the mountains is rotting quietly in the woods, behind locked gates. And the tunnels they finished were dug by men a railroad had given up on. Tunnels that never carried a single train, holed through and paved by a second army of machines 50 years later, only to be abandoned all over again. A highway built inside a ghost. That is the part the number always leaves out. If the real story moved you more than the legend, like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Would you drive that abandoned stretch if they ever let you back in?